Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
I will just jump into it and I'll bring it back all the way to the beginning. And for the listeners to know if they don't already, what got you into music?
Well, growing up in LA in the 1980s, I was exposed to a pretty eclectic range of music. My parents were of two different backgrounds. My dad's Jewish, my mom's Latin American from Mexico originally. And we listened to everything from classic rock to Latin music to top 40 pop, Michael Jackson, I mean, just like very eclectic, different kinds of music. And then I had a cousin who was really into hard rock, AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, all that stuff, who turned us on to me and my brother Josh onto some of that stuff. So early on, I was into music just as a fan, but it was when my older brother started playing electric guitar when he was about 14 and he started a band that I thought that's really cool. And I want to do that too. So that was when I was about 11. And then I begged my parents for a drum set for Christmas that year. They said no at first. And then Christmas morning, I woke up and there was a drum set in our living room. So I was extremely excited. And thus began my journey as a musician.
I mean, thank God they did that. I bet they already had it and they're like, oh, let's divert him.
Well, actually, my dad tells a funny story because he said at first he was like, "No way, it's way too loud. It's going to be disruptive." Most parents would have that reaction. Drums of all the instruments, you're going to play the drums, and so he did say no, and he meant it at first. But he says I cried when I was pleading for. I don't remember crying. But he says I was crying, and I said to him, the way that the guitar was in Josh's, it was inside of him, and it just came out. The drums are inside of me, just waiting to come out. So you have to give me a drum set. I have to be a drummer. And he said, "How could I say no to that?" So that's
Well,
what he told him.
hey, whether you remember or not, at least it worked, right? So let's flash forward to high school when things started, it started like snowballing from there.
Mhm.
You know, how did you know that this was the route that you wanted to take and describe the dynamic that you had with Adam, Jesse, and Mickey at the time?
Well, when I was about 14, 15, I joined my brother's band, and that was my first foray into performing, in nightclubs and stuff. And I got the bug really quick. I was like, this is so exciting. Even though there was like no one in the crowd when we were playing.
That's
It
how
was
it always
just
starts.
right. But it was on the Sunset Strip here in LA, the Whiskey A Go Go and the Roxy and the Troubadour and all the great clubs that have so much history. But then my brother and his friends all went off to college, and I was left at Brentwood High School without any of the older guys that I had been playing with. And Adam Levine was a kid that I knew through a family connection, and we had played a little bit when we first both started playing. When I first started the drums, he first started rhythm and guitar. We jammed a little bit, but I had never heard him sing until that year right after my brother went back off to college and I
Mhm.
was looking for new musicians to play with. And I went to see his band that he was just kind of a secondary figure in. He was just a rhythm guitarist, but they let him come up to center stage and sing lead vocals on the last song. And when I saw him do that and he sang the song Rockin' Robin, I thought to myself, okay, this kid's only like 14 years old at that point. Um, and he's very unpolished and very nervous, but you don't find a unique voice like that
Mhm.
very often. And I thought, whatever band I start or whatever whoever I play with, starting with a good vocalist is the hardest thing to find. So I wanted to form a band with him. He was friends with Jesse and Mickey already at that point from middle school. I had met them a little bit and we jammed in the school pep band a little bit. But then when I wanted to start a band with Adam, he and Jesse were asking me to join the band they were starting. And I was like, I don't know, these kids, they're pretty young. They haven't played much. But it was only a matter of time before all of a sudden we realized we had a chemistry together that far surpassed the inexperience. We were just like really on the same page in terms of the kind of music we were inspired by, the way in which we wanted to play. And we just kind of locked in together one day in the school orchestra room playing Rage Against the Machines, Killing in the Name. So that was an auspicious start to Maroon 5.
My sister would love that story, by the way. She's been on a Rage Against the Machine kick lately.
Okay.
So she would probably die for that. But then when was the moment that you're like, I want to do this as a career?
Well, I think we knew there was something special between us early on. I don't think we could have foreseen that it would be to the level that it became, but we actually started getting some interest pretty early on. I think about a year or so into being a band together. An independent label offered us to make a record with us and stuff, and that was the first sort of glimpse that we got that maybe there we could actually go somewhere with this. And then we had stars in our eyes. Then it became, wow, we're actually pretty good, and maybe we could make a real album and be the next Pearl Jam, which was the aspiration at the time. So it was in high school still. It was when I was maybe 17, they were 15, 16, the other guys. And then we started really thinking like, we have a chance here. And we were so thankful. I mean, I didn't realize how rare this was at the time that our families were very supportive of us
Yeah.
pursuing our dreams. We had stars in our eyes and we wanted to be rock stars. I don't know if they knew that if they thought that was realistic, but they were very supportive of us having a passion and having a dream. And it's you have the opportunity, you got to go for it 100%. So a lot of parents, I don't think would support that. Of course, at the same time, they were saying, but please get your degree, first.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think you're absolutely right. Like it doesn't happen all the time, but at least I think like you were in the sweet spot of an age for that to happen because I feel like, once you graduate high school, then like parents are like expecting, more and more as the years move on. But do you have a favorite moment together after all these years?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and it's funny when people ask me about the great moments when, of course, we got to do some incredible things when we
Hmm.
started having success, and there were some really amazing moments meeting some of our heroes and stuff. But when I think about the best moments of being in the band, it's really more about the times when it was the four and then five of us just alone. The camaraderie of that unit, being a band of brothers and connecting on a level that no one else could understand. We had our own language in the way that we spoke with each other and
Hmm.
and our own sense of humor. And so when I do think back at like the best moments, it's like riding around in my hand-me-down Jeep Wagoneer with the original members, like talking about chicks and talking, like those were the best moments because that's such a coming of age. It's almost
Yeah.
those memories are in a like a seat, film flashback, of just this wonderful Stand By Me or something like that. Kids just being idiots together.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest moments of our lives, I feel like. I mean, when things don't get too tough at that time,
Right.
I believe it. It's like carefree. Did it ever become like challenging? When did the band start evolve or like how did the band evolve over the years? And like what are some challenges did you come across as things progressed?
I would have to say in the 12 years that I was in the band that it was a constant evolution.
Mhm.
There was never a moment of standing pat. We were always moving forward. We were always evolving. Part of that had to do with like you said, the age that we were at. We started so young. I was 16 when we started. I was 28 when we left. So I mean, that's a big range of growth and development as a young man. Also, just the personalities in the band, I think. Adam is a personality where he never likes to go backwards. He never wants to accept what was or what is or try to reach for something that was and hold on to it. He's always thinking of the next thing that's going to be better and different. And um, sometimes even too fast for me. I'd be like, wait a second, we just started this thing and it's working. And then he's already on to the next thing. A little bit of ADD in there, but some of it's also just kind of a similar. I'm a perfectionist in one way. I can be really hard on myself. He's a
Mhm.
perfectionist in a slightly different way in terms of striving for greatness and always moving forward towards it in whatever way he can. And Jesse is a big thinker too. He was always very grandiose in his notions of things. It was like, we're going to do something bigger and different. And unique and we're going to turn the world on with our music and change people's minds, hearts and minds. And so we were, I think, again, this was just my experience. I had nothing to compare it to. So
Right.
it just seemed like that was normal to me. Looking back, I realized how unique and special it was that we were that ambitious and that driven. And so if you look at any year of those 12 years, we were really a different band. I mean, we tried out a lot of different genres. We were constantly moving forward. And the first real album we made in 97 on Warner Brothers, the Cars Flowers album, The Fourth World, you talked about, challenges and hardships. We thought that was going to be our big break, right? Everyone told us that was going to be our big break. And we went out on the road thinking we were heading out to be rock stars and that was it. And that album tanked
Yeah.
completely. And the end result of that whole experience was we were back at square one with no representation, a real identity crisis as to what kind of band we were, and if we were going to move forward at all as a band, let alone what kind of band we were going to be. So that was the hardest challenge, was figuring out how to pick up the pieces and reconnect and decide, are we going to do this? And if so, what do we need to change? And how is it, what's that going to look like? Fortunately, after a couple of years, we were able to reconnect and find a new beginning to the band, and which became Maroon 5 and the new sound that we discovered. And it was a great departure from everything we'd done before that.
So do you think it was the sound that, like, it didn't get you exactly what everyone was expecting? Or why do you think it was like a quote flop, like you just said?
Well, it was a combination of things. We definitely were not ready. We were
Mhm.
very green. We made that album while the other three members were seniors in high school.
Yeah.
And we were really spoiled brats because, we had been playing music for a few years really, and all of a sudden we've got Warner Brothers, Reprise Records spending $1 million on us. And I mean, it was like, "Oh, here we are. We're the Beatles." And, and Rob Cavallo, who had just had a massive hit with Green Day, was producing our album. And, we were in the studio for a year with a 24-piece orchestra and just ridiculous stuff that was way beyond where we
Mhm.
were in our development. So we were a little bit naive and probably a little too cocky. And, the music was, we were precocious musically. I mean, there was a lot of melody in those songs that was beyond our years. And there was a lot of, what was great about it, it was a cool intersection between being beyond our years musically in some ways, but also very youthful. And
Mhm.
there's just a lot of exuberance in our performance at that point. What was lacking was lyrics, really, more than anything. Adam was, he was 17 years old and he had not really come into himself as a lyricist yet. He'll tell you the same thing. I mean, it was just kind of remnants of the early 90s era
Yes.
we'd been inspired by in terms of just totally random and meaningless imagery. Um, and so there was no way at that point in history it was going to connect to a large audience. Also because we were like so young and naive that there was a lot of just blissfulness in the music, and there was so much irony in pop music at that time. It was the middle of the Alanis Morissette
Yes.
and Weezer era. So us wanting to be the Beatles and just have really "I Want to Hold Your Hand" kind of songs on the radio was not going to work.
Yeah, it's interesting how the sentiment of music has changed over the decades. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head because, as I listened through it, I couldn't like pinpoint, but I'm like, this is so 90s, when you go back to it after not hearing it for so long. But yeah, I that perfectly helped me out right now. So I mean, let's flash forward to today and what you're doing, which I think is so great that, you know, you were able to pivot your career into what you're doing now and now reflect on it basically. Not very many people do that. It must have been hard to leave the band when you did and to, what I would assume would be working on yourself and doing what you need to. Like tell me about that transition and where you're at the time.
Well, it was something that took about a decade really to make that transition because when I left the band, I was dealing with a lot of really complicated mental health issues. Things that started before I left the band, but I didn't really have any understanding of it yet at that point. All I knew was that I had lost the thing that had been not only something I'd been working towards for a decade plus, but also very just defining of my identity. You know, being in that band, being not just a drummer, but being a creative entity, part of a team
Yeah.
that had, you know, had that really special connection that in some ways I took for granted, not realizing that it was such a special thing that wouldn't last forever. And my whole social life and everything was centered around the band too. So it was just it went from being in the middle of that to all of a sudden being cast aside. And there was grief, there was depression, there was anxiety. And for the first time in my life, I just didn't have the coping skills to deal with everything I was feeling. And what had been a relatively a normal relationship with alcohol before then, all of a sudden became a really complicated and unhealthy relationship with alcohol because it was just an escape. It had been, it had only been for fun before that. It had been
Yeah.
for, just going out with friends and tying one on and having a great night. And now it was trying to escape and avoid the pain and, take on an alter ego or put on a mask of some kind. And that got dark really quickly. And like I said, it took about a decade for me to find both closure on that chapter of my life and to finally quit drinking and start a journey of recovery. And that journey is what has led me to where I am now because turning that page and finding sobriety first, but then finding new meaning and purpose in what I'm doing and being of service to others. That was something I hadn't even thought about for a long time because I just was so mired in my own sort of self
Hmm.
loathing, that I didn't know how I could possibly show up for another human being in a helpful way. But then here I am in early recovery and I'm volunteering at a recovery center and I'm telling my story and I'm offering some hope and inspiration in sobriety and just being there with other human beings that are suffering and trying to be empathic and compassionate. And it was meaningful and it was really, it impacted me in a way that I realized I had something to give that was possibly even greater than the gift of the music that we had created, as a person with a background that was both wonderful and really challenging and painful. What I had gained in that journey was something that I had to offer to other human beings. And so it just led to me wanting to do it for a career. And I went back to school and became a therapist.
Which is incredible. And I mean, not everyone has the same story as you, but I think like by you sharing yours, like a lot have experienced some points, in their life in their own way. And also like substance substance and mental health is such still an issue in especially in entertainment and music that not a lot of people talk about it. I think more and more now it's becoming like a great thing. Like in fact, I I'll send you an email after, but there are quite a few friends that, have a platform where that's all they talk about in music. And I think they would love to talk to you too, but it's just great that it's starting to be something that people are acknowledging, especially when you have such a demanding lifestyle like you had, like on the road. I don't know what that's, but like I can see it in some aspect. Um, was there anyone that like helped push you towards this new career path?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to have a lot of support in my recovery and that led to this. And I had my sort of 12-step community and then the recovery center that I was volunteering at. There were counselors there were clients there that were very appreciative and supportive and encouraging of me saying, you're so great in terms of how you sit with us and you're able to articulate ideas of recovery. And that really, on top of everything else, just gave me confidence for the first time in a long time, because I'd been so beaten
Yeah.
down. My self-esteem was so low, leaving the band and dealing with that loss and just feeling like a failure. So feeling, having people give me that encouragement, my family as well, just being very loving and supportive, it really gave me the confidence to move forward and to realize that I had something to offer. And then I also discovered, talents and things that I had neglected for a long time, because my self-definition was so wrapped up in Maroon
Yeah.
5 that I forgot that I had a degree in English from UCLA and that I loved writing and that there were other aspects to my life before there was Maroon 5, right? And so going back to school and re-engaging academically and getting encouragement there, my professors, my cohort of students, um, every step of the way, it's been really wonderful working with people that are like-minded and just recognizing that I have something to offer beyond my past. And then writing this book, that journey has been a whole other fulfilling process with a lot of encouragement and wonderful people involved along the way. And so putting this book out is the culmination of that whole journey and hopefully the beginning of another journey.
Yeah. And I am happy that you brought that up because I was going to ask about that. Of course, your book, Harder to Breathe. Why was it so important for you to write it?
The book was something I thought about writing maybe 5, 10 years earlier, but I if I had done it then, it would have been a very different book for a lot of reasons, and that's why I didn't do it really. I mean, I was not in a good place and I couldn't really commit myself to it, but also I just didn't know what the purpose would have been other than I mean, I knew I had a story that was unique, but there was no message really, you know? Um, but then I found myself in recovery in grad school studying psychology, and part of becoming a therapist is you have to do a lot of self-reflection. You have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can put it on somebody else. So, I mean, I've been doing that a lot in my own therapy and in the 12 steps and everything. But doing it and having to write about it, write papers about it, and it was just another level in terms of a narrative therapy, rewriting my story in a way that was going to be helpful to me. And and so it just started coming to me, this book, and I realized, wow, I actually have a purpose for this book now because it has a happy ending. Everything that I went through leads to this moment of inspiration and regaining hope and finding new purpose and
Mhm.
fulfillment in life. And if I can do it, anyone can do it, as cliche as that sounds. Um, so I just felt like it was not just something I wanted to do, but something I felt like I needed to do, that it would be another therapeutic process for me to
Mhm.
write it. And then, to use another cliche, if it can help one person, then I will have done my job. And it feels great.
Yes. Hey, I love all your cliches. I can have their opinion, but they're cliches for a reason. And
Right.
so there's definitely truth to it. But you know what? As we're having this conversation, I feel like it's so relatable. Like whether you're in music or not, whether you are a musician or not. And like the message that I'm getting out of this is, what you are doing as your career is not your only identity. Like, I've had that in my life too. One of my past jobs, and I'm not gonna name anything because I haven't exactly had closure and I don't wanna have this on the podcast, but, like, I was, like, all in this role that I had. I thought it was my everything. I thought it was, like, it was the end goal, the best thing I could possibly get to. And then one day they let me go and I was just like, what am I doing now? I put my heart and soul into something. So it's who am I? What am I doing? And I think a lot of people have an issue with this no matter what they're doing in life. They think their job is them. And that's one thing that I've learned too over the last couple of years is like my personal brand is so different. I'm so different than the companies I work for. And so I want to share that. And so I'm happy that you wrote this and that you're sharing your story because a lot of people can relate.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story in that regard, because I do think that that's more common than people realize. How much we get wrapped up in an identity that might come from a job or something else that is so defining of us in a particular moment in our life that it's hard to see that there's life outside of that identity and that we're more than just that one thing.
Mhm.
And I, for one, now, being in my 40s and having lived what feels like four lives,
I bet.
everything before Maroon 5 and then Maroon 5 and then an alcoholic and then my life now. It feels like those have all been like different chapters or identities really. I see life as, there's seasons in life. And it's a long journey where um you might feel one way at one point in your life and then 20 years later you're in a very different space. And hopefully it's growth, hopefully you're
Yeah.
moving in a direction where even if you're doing something entirely different from what you were doing earlier, it's more fulfilling. It's more fully who you are. And sometimes you can't see that when you're in the middle of it.
It's true.
When in the middle of that process and finding yourself, it feels like you're losing something. And there's a grieving process, I think, that you have to go through to let go of that old identity. I certainly did have to go through a grieving process. And you go through all the stages, just like losing a loved one. There's denial at first, and anger and depression. And it takes a while to get to that place of acceptance, which is so important to eventually find that acceptance and move into a place of gratitude for where you've been and where you're going.
Yeah, and I didn't look at it that way, but I'm gonna take a little snippet of what you just said because I think that's so helpful and really great to put out there. I'm not gonna get into it, but I feel like that's like really great for like personal relationships too, not just like when you're losing someone, but just when maybe you don't have the same relationships that you had. But I had a point there and now I lost my point of thought.
No, but that's true in life. Yeah, I agree for relationships too. I mean, the end of a relationship, as a therapist now, I work with people that are going through divorce, going through breakups. Life transitions are complicated. And if it's, a person certainly can be really wrapped up in your self identity. This is a person I've been with for 5 years, 10
Um,
years, 20 years,
yeah.
whatever. And your whole life it's not a me, it's a we. And then all of a sudden it's back to me. I mean, it's a total shift in terms of your own identity um, yeah, there's grief.
Yeah. And also, as you said that, I just remembered what I was about to say
Now you
as
might.
well. But life is fluid. And I think that's like something that we have to like just learn because I think a lot of people see it as I mean, there's growth in many different ways, but I think a lot of people see it as like always going upward. And it's like that's that's like just not like reality. Like things happen, there's setbacks as we can see in different variations. And like you said, whether you recognize it now or not, it'll help you for what you're trying to do later on. And you'll know that when it happens, but you don't necessarily know it now. What's the purpose of it?
Yeah.
So I have to ask you, and I ask every guest this: what do you want to be known for?
That's a great question. And it's a question that I would have answered very differently, obviously,
Yeah.
at a point in my life. Um, to be in a selfless way, I would like to be known for somebody who gave of himself in a helpful way, that used both what I've been given in terms of being very fortunate in life, very blessed in a lot of ways, but also the challenges that I've faced and the things that I've had to overcome. Use them to be of service, to give something back to people um, that can be of use to them in their own journey. Now, that's a very, altruistic way to look at it, of course, and it is very much what I'm doing. But at the same time, I still have an ego. I still, I of course would love for people to like my book and think I'm a good writer and that I do the things that I'm doing well. But I think you can be both. You can be have pride in the things you do and do them well, but also want to be giving and have had some impact on the world, in a positive way.
Yeah. Hey, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Right.
we're like, I mean, if you're self-aware, you know, which also I think is a lot of learning that people can make too. But no, I can appreciate that. And I really appreciate this conversation. And I will share a link to your book. I'm definitely going to get it myself. I love talking about just journeys, recovery, mental health in my personal life, not always on this podcast. So this was like a treat in itself with how different we were able to discuss. But I really appreciate your time, Ryan. Thank you so much for being on this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.
All right. See ya.
Bye.